Hello, everyone. Welcome to Woodside SDA Youth, where we are doing 365 days with Jesus, or in other words, the Bible reading plan. And today we're supposed to read the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 16 to chapter 19. And just like that, guys, I think in 3 or 4 days, we are done with the book of Deuteronomy. And just like that, we're done with the first 5 books of the Bible, the books of Moses, the most controversial books, according to many people. And we now have more knowledge about a lot of topics, right? I'm pretty sure all of us have been blessed with the reading. If you haven't started, guys, the best time is now. Just start where we are, start where we left off, and just make a plan to catch up. During your weekends, during your Sabbaths, um, during your Sabbath naps, use that time to catch up with the reading. It's just a big blessing. It has been a big blessing for me, and I know it's a big blessing for you guys. So let us start right away. For let's see, we had to read 3 chapters. No, 4 chapters. Okay, so let's talk about them very quickly before we hit our 3 points. 16, we see that the Feast of Weeks and the Passover are reviewed. It gives us an overview of what this is, and I think this is the way God's reminding the new generation about these feasts, right, and why they should keep it and why they are important. We see also the Feast of Tabernacles is being reviewed, and at the end of the chapter, we see a very nice message about justice, right? And we'll get to that later. In chapter 17, we see God giving details about what a king should follow, what principles of a king should have, right? And it was very interesting to me. We'll also touch that in just a bit. In chapter 18, talks about the priests and the Levites, how because they are not working on the fields, because they're not raising cattle, and they're not gonna have meat to eat because they don't raise the meat, they don't have a lot of animals, they don't have land. Their source of living comes from what the people give them, right? So that is how the priests and the Levites live. It also talks about a new prophet that is coming after Moses, and we'll talk about that soon. Chapter 19, it mentions 3 cities of refuge. And why 3 cities of refuge? When someone kills someone accidentally, in order to protect their lives, because it was an accident, right? Not because he actually wanted to kill the person, because it was an accident, they would go to these cities of refuge, and there they wouldn't be killed. We also see law concerning witnesses. As we know, there were so many cases the judges had to deal with back then. And back then, there was no security cameras. Back then, there was no cell phones. Back then, there was no emails where we can gather so much information and see if someone is guilty or not. So back then, when something happened and there was only one witness, they will drop the case. Here in this chapter, it tells us that you need at least 2 or 3 witnesses so that they can carry out the the judgment on this person. So let us start with our 3 points. The first point is what new things I learned. One of the things that I learned in chapter 16, verse 16, I found out that 3 times a year, all the males would bring tribute to the Lord in one of the feasts where the Lord would tell them when to bring it, right? I didn't know this. Uh, Maybe they mentioned it before in previous books, but I didn't know. So all the males would come with gifts in their hands, and they would go to the temple or to the place where God told them, and they would give tribute. So 3 times a day, all 3 times a year, all of the males did this. Another interesting thing that I learned was the principle of for governing kings, right? So it gives me a sense that God didn't want kings, but if they were to have kings, these are the principles that the kings should follow. One of them being they should not have multiple wives. And as we know in the story, the only king that followed this rule was King Saul. He only had one wife. The rest of the kings had multiple wives, right? So it was interesting that King Saul is the only one who followed this. Now, yes, King Saul did have concubines, so I'm guessing it's kind of the same thing. I don't even know, probably. But yeah, why does this example for not having multiple wives, stay in my head is because Solomon, even though he followed most of those principles here, he failed on this one of not having multiple wives. And we know that he had so many, almost 1,000, that these women just turned his heart away. All these problems that he got himself into was rooted on the failure of following this principle, right? And so now let us transition to part two, which is asking questions. What questions do I have? And since we're already talking about the kings, I'm going to ask, do you guys think that God ever wanted kings in the first place for the people of Israel? Because when they chose King Saul, God didn't want to give them a king. Here in this chapter, God doesn't really want them a king. He's just telling them there's going to be a time where you guys want a king and no longer me, right? So if you guys choose a king, make sure he follows these things. And these things were for the good of them because it limits the power of the king so he doesn't become a tyrant. But many became tyrants. We know that for sure. But God says, I don't really want you guys, but since you guys are going to ask for one, if you guys do pick a king, make sure uh, it's he followed these principles, right? So my question is, God talked to Abraham, Isaac and Jacob. He says, from you guys, a generation will come with great kings. So that they God want kings because he promised them kings and rulers from their lineage, or because God knows the future and he knows the people of Israel will pick kings regardless. He says, from you there will come kings. So I guess my question is, did God ever want kings, or he just mentioned kings because people were gonna pick them anyway, but his actual purpose was not to have kings at all? One of my professors in Andrews University believes that God actually never intended to have kings. He never wanted Saul, he never wanted David, he never wanted Solomon, but because the people would want them, that's why he said that kings will come from your lineage when he God said that to Abraham. So what do you guys think? Did God actually want kings or not? Good question, I would say. Another very important question that I have about the reading is found in chapter 18, verses 15 to 22, where it talks about a new prophet like Moses. So Moses was going to die soon, and in these verses, we see that a new prophet will come after Moses. Now, the question is, who is this new prophet? Is this Joshua, which at first glance I thought it was Joshua, but now I'm questioning, is Joshua a prophet? Was he mentioned or given the title of a prophet? Maybe he was. A lot of people think that this chapter, these verses, in this passage actually is talking about Jesus, that the next new prophet that is coming after Moses will be Jesus, years ahead, right? So, what do you guys think? Maybe I need to analyze this passage again and see what details I have that can point to Jesus as being the next prophet that's coming after Moses, right? But that's something very interesting. That's a very good question that I have. So now, guys, let us move on to the application. What message does God have for me today? We're not just reading this just to read. We're not just reading it just so that you can brag to your friends, oh, I read the entire Bible. No, the point of this reading is to learn things about God. The point of this reading is to listen to what message God has for us. So, what really stuck with me was chapter 16, verses 18, 19, 20, where it talks about, and in verse 19, it actually says, you shall not pervert justice, nor you shall show partiality, right? Don't take a bribe, for bribe blinds the eye of the wise. I would like to focus more on not showing partiality, because I know this probably talking about the cases that the judges had to deal with in that time, but I think that God also means this as in a personal way, as a personal application. Don't show partiality. Even though you and I are not judges, maybe you are. Maybe someone listening here is actually a federal judge, right? But I don't think most of us are judges, right? So why would this apply to me? I think this applies to us because God is telling you, please don't show partiality in your everyday life. Don't show partiality at school, in your family, at your job, in church. Don't show partiality. Don't pervert justice, right? I feel like when we read these type of things, we like to apply these negative things to everybody else. Like, oh, partiality. Oh yeah, that person does it. That other person does it. Not me, because I am not a racist. I'm not a prejudice. I'm not this and that. But I think a lot of us show partiality. You know, when we, prefer or give reason to this person because we are close to them, or because we are friends and stuff, and not give reason to the other one because we don't really know them, right? Partiality can take comes in all shapes and sizes, right? And I think it happens a lot in our close circle of friends, in our families. It happens a lot in church. Partiality, guys. We are all equal in the eyes of God. I think one of the most beautiful things that one can witness in this life is a bunch of people from different backgrounds, from different cultures, from different languages, from different nations just come together, and whatever they do, they act as one. And I think our churches will be more filled when us, you know, from different nations, backgrounds, cultures, when we get together, that there is no partiality between us because of our differences, but we all come together and act as one. When we all come together and act as one, instead of judging each other, instead of talking bad about each other behind our backs, you know, behind everyone's backs, when we just eliminate all these prejudices and racism, and then we act together, and people see all of us acting together, people who are different from each other working together, I think when a lot of people see that, they will say, I think that's a place where God is abiding. I think these people are showing what happens when you have Jesus in your hearts. But a lot of us don't do that. A lot of us like to separate in our own little groups when we are in church. And believe it or not, when things arise, we will show partiality. When hard issues arises, if we are in our little groups, when hard issues come up and a lot of debates come up, we will show partiality because of our division, guys. God wants us to be together. The message here, I think, or I believe, is God is asking us to be one, act as one, show no partiality. When there's justice, call out, what's wrong, see the mistake and call it out, see the mistake and go and fix it. See someone who's suffering, don't show partiality, but help that person. God wants us to work together as a church, because God is coming here not to pick us up as individuals, but He's coming to pick us up and take us to heaven as a church. You know, why would He come here and pick a church that is divided? He's not going to do that. He wants to come and bring everyone closer together, people who are united. This was the message for today, guys. If you were impacted by a lot of the verses that was read today, please comment down below what did you like about the reading, or send us a message. Guys, if you also have any suggestions about these videos, or you want to be or you want to volunteer to do one of these videos, please also message us. We're looking for a lot of people so that a lot of us can participate. We can give our different viewpoints so that we can all share the wonderful messages that God has for us. Guys, thank you so much for joining me, and have a good night, and I'll see you again tomorrow. God bless.